Welcome to Torah Today Ministries, our continuing series, Tehillim Talks, our studies in the Psalms. And this week we find ourselves in what is probably your favorite psalm, at least for most of you listening to this, and that is Psalm 23. It's taken me a while to prepare this psalm, even though it's only 6 verses, because I know that it's very likely that I'm talking about your favorite passage in the Bible. So you may have some very strong feelings about how I go about doing this. Well, I'm certainly not going to try to quote all the many wonderful works or try to compete with the great books that have been written about the psalm. And I'm thinking particularly about Philip Keller's book, A Shepherd Looks at the 23rd Psalm, a book that came out over 50 years ago and has sold millions of copies, a wonderful book. So I'm just going to bring you the things that I see, the things I see in the Hebrew, and the thoughts that arise as I reflect upon this beautiful, beautiful Psalm of David. So let's get started. Now, we have to recall that as I introduced Psalm 22, I introduced it as the Psalms that Messiah was living out on the cross. Because as you recall, Psalm 22 begins with, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then you go on up several more Psalms, and then that section of Psalms ends with, into your hands I commit my spirit. And so I look at these Psalms, as a group of Psalms, as being Psalms that reveal the heart of Messiah as he's on the cross. And the things that he speaks from the cross, you can find them alluded to in this body of Psalms. So if you haven't listened to Psalm 22 yet, the teaching that I've done on it, please go back and do that one first, and then come back and pick it up here with Psalm 23. So let's get started. Psalm 23, of course, is a Psalm of David. And let's look at the first 3 verses. Adonai is my shepherd. I shall want for nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He continually restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Now that opening phrase, the Lord is my shepherd, it's just 2 words in Hebrew. Adonai roi. Adonai is my shepherd. And that's very comforting to know that, because a shepherd is to protect his sheep, feed his sheep, take care of his sheep. But there are 2 things that should be a little disturbing about this. First of all, to be called a sheep is no compliment. Think about it for a moment. Sheep are not very smart. Now, they have intelligence in certain ways, but you'll never go to a circus and see a trained sheep act. It's just not going to happen. Teaching sheep to do tricks isn't going to work. Other animals are much more intelligent than sheep are. Sheep also have no natural defenses. You let a sheep go into the wild, it's not going to live for very long. A sheep requires a shepherd to survive. So sheep aren't very smart. They can be very stubborn, not as much as goats, but they're up there. And they have no natural defenses. So God doesn't call us his herd of lions, or his pride of lions, or herd of elephants, or his nest of eagles. He calls us sheep. Again, not a compliment. But if you really want to understand a human being, think of a sheep. Whenever I come to this thought about how we are like sheep, I'm reminded when my family and I lived in England for a year. This is back in the late 1980s, not the 1880s. I'm not that old. And we lived in a little village, Great Somerford in Wiltshire County. And there were a lot of sheep, herds of sheep around us, flocks of sheep and shepherds. And one day, while I was at school teaching, my wife was at home with our daughter Lindsay, who was just a baby. And up the lane of our little village came a whole flock of sheep. You could almost call it a stampede. And the shepherds, instead of being on horses or walking along, they're on these little mopeds trying to herd these sheep up the lane to a different pasture. And it just so happened that the garage door was up. And the shepherd came by, my wife came out, and he asked her, would you stand here at the end of your driveway to make sure none of the sheep go up the drive? And so she did, but one still got past her. And this one sheep went up the driveway, straight into the garage, into the corner of the garage, with its head in the corner where the two walls meet. And with its head in the corner, it kept pushing, trying to walk. Robin says, I learned about everything I needed to know about sheep and how we are sheep by watching that one sheep. And how many times have I and others I know followed our own way, did what was right in our own eyes, got ourselves into a corner and just kept on pushing, getting nowhere. So God calls us his sheep. It's not a compliment. The thing that is a compliment about that is that we're his sheep. We are the sheep of his pasture, the flock of his hand. And he's not ashamed to call us his. But here's the second thing that's disturbing. Though a shepherd will feed the sheep and protect the sheep, watch over the sheep, he's also the one who generally takes the life of each sheep. And in ancient times, it would be to provide this sheep for a sacrifice or it'd be for food. Now, how can that be comforting? Let me tell you how. Again, while we were in England, and there were sheep all around us. In the spring, when the sheep would give birth, it was amazing to drive past the fields, and it looked like little tufts of cotton, little cotton balls all over the fields because the sheep had given birth, and these little lambs, just little puffs of cotton it looked like. And while we were driving past one farm, right there by the side of the road, there was a man who was holding up a ewe by its front legs, and there was another shepherd bent down in front of it, helping it to deliver a little lamb. And so he's there at the birth of the sheep. And as a good shepherd is there at the birth of the sheep, the shepherd is also there to shepherd the death of a sheep. In this world, because we're born into a world that has been afflicted with sin, it's a world that's under a curse at the moment, that means we're going to go through death. And since we have to go through death, there's no way to avoid this door of death. I'm so glad that my shepherd not only oversees my birth, but my days are in his hand. He teaches me to number my days. My times are in his hand, and he will also oversee my death. And if you're part of a flock, that means your death has purpose. So if we're going to die, I want my death to have purpose. And since the Lord is my shepherd, I know that however I go, whenever I go, that somehow my death will also be under his sovereignty. It'll be overseen by him. He'll be at my side. And there's nothing to fear. And as it says later in the psalm, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I don't fear any evil, for you're with me. So, let's move on. I'm not going to spend that much time on every phrase of this song. But because Adonai is my shepherd, I shall lack nothing. I'll want for nothing. He supplies all my needs. So many times the things I think I need, I don't. But the things I truly do need, if I just walk in his steps and allow him to direct my steps, that need is always met perfectly and exactly the right time and the right way. We never have to worry. Verse 2, he makes me lie down in green pastures. So there we see rest. He leads me beside still waters. And so there we see our thirst will be quenched. He continually restores my soul. And so we see here that there's life being given. Now, that word restores is one we'll see a little bit later on. It appears again later in the psalm. So we'll wait till that point to discuss that word for restore. But I do want us to realize that this is not the first time we've encountered restoration of the soul in the book of Psalms. Back in Psalm 19 and verse 7, it says, "The Torah of Adonai is perfect, restoring the soul." That word restore means to return the soul. So I guess I am going to talk about this a little bit right here. Have you ever felt a little bit ill and you might say, "I'm just not feeling myself"? What that means is my body doesn't feel the way it normally does when I'm full of energy and I'm awake and doing well. I just don't feel myself. But more often, this is a true statement concerning the state of our soul than it is about the state of our bodies. Because so many times, you just don't feel yourself because something's attacking your soul. Your mind is distracted. There's some anxiety, there's some worry. Or there's some sin in your life that has taken you off the path a little bit and it's nudged you out of balance. And you're just not feeling yourself because your soul has strayed. It needs to be restored. Some of your soul has gotten off the tracks. It needs to be put back on. And so God is so faithful to restore our souls. But we first of all need to acknowledge that our souls need restored. They need returned to us so that we can truly be ourselves, the self that God wants us to be. And of course, in Matthew 11, Yeshua talks about people coming to him, and when we do, he says, "I will restore your soul." And so the Torah restores our souls. Yeshua restores our souls. And here in Psalm 23, we see that Adonai continually restores our souls. Because our souls always wander off the path, don't they? Kind of like a sheep with its head in the corner of the garage. He leads me in paths of righteousness. Now, this word for paths is the word ma'agel, and here you see it in the Hebrew, ma'agel. And most people who are somewhat familiar with Hebrew, what they're going to notice are these last three letters, the word egel. Now, egel has a couple different meanings. It can mean a circle, and it can mean a place, a circuit, so to speak. And, sheep and oxen and others will often travel a circuit. And some of these paths eventually get paved over and become roads. That's why they're so windy. But the word egel also means a calf. And if you're familiar with Hebrew, you know that the golden calf that was worshipped as an idol was called the egel zahav, the calf of gold. And so this word ma'agel can mean also from the calf. But we know it's supposed to be translated paths. But there's always another meaning to a word. There's always another layer. And when we follow God, he's going to keep us from the golden calves in our lives. He's going to keep us ma'egel, from the calves that we always tend to build. We tend to gravitate towards idols, and we can make an idol of anything and do. And that's one of the ways our souls stray and they need restored. Whatever is good, whatever we put our hope in, we can easily turn into an idol. And even good things, wonderful things. We can make an idol of a spouse. I see a lot of parents making idols of their children. I've seen people go into ministries. A ministry becomes successful, and that ministry becomes an idol to the one who's doing the ministry or to the people who are part of a congregation. I've seen people in churches worship the church community more than they worship God. I've seen people make idols of theology, and they make their theology God, and they act as if their theology is their Savior and their theology is their God. We need to be very careful because we are so easily led astray. We so easily wander off the path, and we do what's right in our own eyes. But whatever seems right in our own eyes is always wrong in God's eyes. So we need to have our souls restored, and we need to walk in paths, ma'agel, of righteousness. Why? For his name's sake. I want you to think about something. When people see you and recognize that you call yourself a believer, a disciple of Messiah, God's reputation is at stake. When you claim to be one of God's followers, you are putting His name on the line. Because people who don't know God are going to assess your God by what they see in you. And so we must ask God to lead us in paths of righteousness because His name is at stake. We want to do it for His name's sake. And we want to do it only for the cause of His name and of His kingdom. But if we try to walk in righteousness for our own name's sake, we become hypocrites. So let's be very careful that we ask Him to lead us in paths of righteousness, away from idolatry, and in a path that gives glory to His name. We want to be lights in the world so that people, when they see our good works, they don't give glory to us, but to our Father in heaven. It's very important. Let's move on to verse 4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are ever with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And you might notice here that I put the word chastening in brackets before the word rod, and the word supporting in brackets before the word staff, because the Hebrew words for rod and staff carry these two shadings of meaning. The rod was used to bring correction, to smack a sheep on the head or in the rear to get it going the right direction. And a lot of the times that we experience pain in our lives or discomfort, that's God's rod, His loving, comforting rod that is bringing correction. We should derive comfort from that because we know He's paying attention to us and He's given us a little smack on the behind to get us back in line for our own good. And your supporting staff. The supporting staff is something that's used to, a person would carry as they walk. And the sheep would see the shepherd because he would have the staff in his hand and to lean on for support. And when they'd see that, they'd be comforted because they know the shepherd is in their midst. So chastening and support and comfort are things that both come from God. But let's back up. Shadow of death. This is a bit of a fanciful translation of the word, but I like it. And this phrase, shadow of death, is found a number of places, at least the Hebrew word for it, which is zal mevet. That word is found more than a dozen times in occurrences in the scriptures, mostly in Job, about 10 times in Job. But it's translated a dark land or deep shadow. But here we have shadow of the valley, the gay Zalmevet, the valley of Zalmevet. Now, how did they get shadow of death? Well, you can see how. The word zel or zelim means shadow. Batzalel, who was commissioned with the construction of the tabernacle. Ba means in, zel means shadow, El means God, in the shadow of God, Batzalel. So zel is shadow, zelim means image, and mavet, the last three letters, mem, vav, tav, can also be pronounced mut. It means death. So zel, shadow, mut, death, valley of the shadow of death. Again, it's a bit of a fanciful translation, but I like it, and I think it's very apt. And this psalm, both in the synagogue and in churches, is often read at a funeral, and that's very appropriate. But we tend to think that the valley of shadow of death is that end of life period when the person's ill and dying and eventually dies. But when I do funerals, I also read this psalm, but I remind people that we're born into the valley of the shadow of death. Because the moment a baby is born, it's born with an expiration date. And every day of that child's life, as they grow into adolescence and adulthood, into old age, they are making a march towards death. Their birth is simply the beginning, and the finishing line is death. Some people think we should grieve when a baby is born because they know it's going to be difficult through life. And then we should rejoice when they die because now the suffering's over. I believe we should rejoice at births. Absolutely rejoice at birth as we choose life. And I believe it's appropriate to grieve at death, not for the one who has died, but for those of us left behind. This is appropriate, and this is normal and natural. But we are always in the valley of the shadow of death. C.S. Lewis called this the Shadowlands. I think it's a very apt name for life here in this world. But there's a day coming when God's kingdom arrives, or we will be resurrected into his kingdom, and how amazing that'll be. And all of this life here will just seem like a dream. And we'll wake up and think, oh, well, I'm glad I woke up from that. This is real life now. And he says, I will fear no evil. Now, in Hebrew, not fear evil is lo ira ra. Lo ira ra. Lo means no or not. That's the negation of the statement. Ira means fear. I will fear. And the word for fear, the verb is yara. But I want you to pay attention to those last two letters. Resh, aleph. That's the word for fear. Now, is fear a good thing or a bad thing? Well, if it's fear of God, it's a good thing. If it's fear of anything else, it's a bad thing. And then we have the word ra again, but this time it's resh ayin. So the ra here, resh aleph, and resh ayin here have the same sound, ra. And the word for see is the word ra'ah, spelled with an aleph. And the word for shepherd is the word ra'ah, spelled with an ayin. So all of these words, to see, to fear, and shepherd, and evil, all have a very similar sound. And so we need to sort through these. I think God made these things all sound alike, so we'd always have to sort through to teach us a lesson. When we're fearful, what are you fearful of? Are you fearful of God? Do you have awe of him? Then fear nothing else. If you're fearing other things, if you have yara of other things, then that is ra, that is evil. But if you're looking ra'ah towards God, you need not yara anything. You kind of get the idea? Does it sound a little confusing? It's because we are always confused of fearing yara, what we ra'ah, what we see. But if our eyes are on God, our fear is only of him, we need fear no ra, no evil. And so, again, these things are meant to sound confusing. But when you see them and study them and sort them out, they're not confusing at all. But they can sound very confusing because in this life, we can be afraid of our shepherd. We can be afraid of evil. We may not fear God. We may fear the things that we see when we shouldn't fear what we see, but we should fear only him with whom we have to do, the one who has the power of life and death. And so we need to sort these things out in our minds all the time. And I know as I read Hebrew, I always have to stop and think, okay, which ra means which? Because they're easy to confuse. Because they're easy to confuse in life as well. And I challenge you to sort through the things you're afraid of. And if you fear anything besides God, then that can very well lead to evil. And if you fail to fear God, I promise you, you'll experience evil in your life. But if you have fear only of God, and you know him as your Yara, as your Roe, Adonai Roe, Lord is my shepherd, you don't have to fear anything else. So sort those things out in your life. Get them straight. And then we come to the final two verses of this very short psalm. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. I know sometimes, for whatever reason, the more I try to serve God, there are people who I'm not really paying attention to are very angry at me. It just comes down to this. anyone who serves God, who's sold out to God, and I want to be sold out to him. I'm not holding myself up as an example, like you need to be like me. I have so far to grow in this. But just suffice it to say this: Yeshua, the perfect one, who served God with a whole heart, with loved God with all his heart, soul, and strength. He was persecuted. He was hated. He was lied about. And people purposely misunderstood him and misspoke about him. And if they're going to do that to him, the perfect one, why should we be surprised if they do the same to us? And Yeshua in the Gospels tells us that the servant is not above his master. And he says, if they treated me this way, don't be surprised when they treat you this way. And one of the things that aggravates our enemies the most is, even though when they are always seeking our harm and want the worst for us, they see us being blessed. It's like they want us to starve, but they see God preparing a table before us. And it's almost like God wants to flaunt his blessings to us in the face of our enemies. And whether I'm aware of my enemies or not, God pours blessings on us to say, look, guys, I'm blessing this person. I'm blessing this one who serves me. And so just eat your hearts out about that. Now, that's probably not a good words to put in God's mouth. Forgive me. But it's God loves to bless us as a witness to those who may hate us. I've just seen it over and over in the lives of the great men and women of the Scriptures and great men and women I've known in my own life. So let's move on. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You refresh my head with oil. That word refresh, I'll tell you right now, it kind of puzzles me. It's the word deshan, or deshan. There it is right there. It means to enrich. It means to fatten. Can you imagine how you could have fun with that translation? God fattens my head. But it means he anoints it, he refreshes it, he puts oil on it. But it also is the word for ashes. And you read in Leviticus about how the priest would come in the morning and take ashes from the altar and take them outside, take ashes from the altar, put it beside the altar, and eventually ashes taken out of the camp. And these ashes even were treated with honor, treated with dignity. And I'm not sure what shadow of meaning God may have concerning ashes. I don't know. It's kind of a puzzle. But I just want to draw your attention to it, because now you can be puzzled right along with me. But he says, my cup overflows. I can't contain all the blessings you pour upon me. Surely goodness and loving kindness will pursue me all the days of my life. And I shall, now here's a question, is that I shall return to the house of the Lord or dwell in the house of the Lord. I put them both here because the word can mean both. Now here we come to that word restore. And it's the word shuv. It was used earlier when God restores my soul. Shuv means to return. And teshuva is the word for repentance, when we turn around. And if you look at this word, people say, well, this is the verb yashav, which means to sit, to dwell someplace. This is where we get the word yeshiva. But if you look in all the lexicons, they say that's not the root. The root of this word is the word shuv, to return. But if you look at this, and look at the middle three letters, shin, beit, tav, it spells the word Shabbat, which means to rest. So I like both meanings, because I know that I only find rest when I return to God. And Shabbat is that great time that God has blessed and even commanded us to observe, where we turn away from all the attention the world demands of us and all the work that demands our attention, and we turn back to just focusing on God, focusing on family, focusing on eternal things, the things that matter, and just Shabbating from all the rest. So in this translation, I just put both words. And so when you quote Psalm 23, think of both of these shades of meaning. and I shall return, I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. Now, going back to what I said at the opening about how Psalm 22, which describes the suffering of our Messiah in such detail 1,000 years before he was born. And then we have this psalm that follows hard on its heels about how God's the shepherd. He restores our souls. He gives us rest. He leads us beside still waters. He anoints our head. He does all these wonderful things. It's like Psalm 23 is the antidote to all the horrible events described in 22. So I've taken the liberty of taking Psalm 22 and Psalm 23 and blending them. And this is just something I've done, just to blend them together. It's not supposed to be an exact translation or a haphazard shuffling of these two psalms. But the more I read 23 and go back to 22 and 22 and go back to 23, I keep seeing these things kind of matching up and pairing up. So I hope you'll be blessed by this as we take these and blend the two psalms together. So the words in black are from Psalm 22. The words in red are taken from Psalm 23. I took a few liberties with tenses and first person, second person, and so on, third person, and to make it kind of blend together. Again, it's a blended reading, something I put together. But here, let's just go with it. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? But you are my shepherd, and I shall want for nothing. Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer. By night, but there is no relief for me. But I know that you will make me lie down in green pastures. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws, but you will lead me beside still waters. Rescue my soul from the sword, my essence from the hand of the dog, and you will restore my soul. You will lead me in paths of righteousness for your name's sake. Dogs encompass me, a company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. But even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are ever with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Though they divide my garments, excuse me, though they divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots, you will prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You will refresh my head with oil. My cup will overflow. And though all who seek me mock me and make mouths at me, I know that goodness and loving kindness will pursue me all the days of my life. You, Adonai, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid, and I shall return and dwell in the house of Adonai forever. So, if you're experiencing a Psalm 22 day, the antidote is to go to Psalm 23, to remind yourself of what's around the corner. All of us in this life will go through this valley of the shadow of death. We're in it right now. We will experience pain. And the Master said that every day has its assigned amount of trouble attached to it. And in this world, we will have trouble. He promised that. But in this world, we also have a shepherd. We have a shepherd that takes good care of us. And so as we experience in our own personal small way Psalm 22, always keep Psalm 23 in mind. And God saw fit to put 23 right after 22, because it is like the oil it puts on our head when our head is splitting with a headache because of the pain of living in this world. So I hope this kind of a stumbling commentary on Psalm 23 contains something of blessing for you. You know, so much has been written and taught about this amazing short little psalm. What do I have to add? Well, there you go. You just heard it. And so, I hope there's something there that is a comfort and blessing to you. And then I'll see you back here again for Psalm 24. So until then, I wish you shalom and may God bless.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.
That's all I have to say.